Welcome to the Escaping the Accountant's Trap podcast. It's a podcast to help accountants, CPAs, and bookkeepers escape what we call the accountant's trap. It's where accountants are not getting paid for their value and are forced to work long hours with high demanding clients with little pay. Well, how do you escape the trap? One way is the topic of today's episode, and that's becoming a better consultant. And to help me with the discussion, I've invited Ed Kless from Sage, who is an expert on consulting consultants. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. I really appreciate it. I'm turning the tables. You were on my podcast a little bit ago, so
That's
I appreciate the invite.
Yes, and that was a really good podcast. So if anybody listening, check it out. What's the name of the podcast?
The Sage Thought Leadership Podcast. I've been doing it about 10 years. We have got over 1,000 episodes in the can. So
excellent. Well, speaking of thought leader, you are a expert, a thought leader on meta consulting. And as we were talking pre-show, you said a meta consultant is a consultant to the consultant. So explain that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a self-given title that I've come up with. This concept of meta consulting. I think it was during COVID. I think that it kind of came to me that I spent most of my career working with or for people who do consulting themselves. So the idea of being a consultant to consultants led to the idea of meta consulting, and that there are concepts around the discipline of consulting that many people in the professions don't really understand or they understand it. And sometimes I will give a presentation where I talk about this and they're like, I've been talking about that for years, but you gave me a name for it. You gave me understanding about what it is that we're really talking about. So hence that's the idea of meta consulting.
All right, well, let's dive in. So what, I guess, how do you define an effective consultant? As business advisors, CFOs, essentially what we're doing is consulting. We're guiding our clients to have a better business, and that's what they want from us. So how do you sort of frame what a successful consultant looks like?
Well, I mean, a successful consultant is defined by their customers being successful. So that there's the answer. But let me back up and just talk about what is it to mean to be a consultant versus what is called by others as a surrogate manager. And a consultant is a person who has some influence over an individual, group, or organization, but, and this is an important part, has no direct authority to make decisions.
Okay.
And I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, that if you want to stay in the consulting role, you don't make decisions on behalf of those you serve. Now, there's another role, which I'll call surrogate manager. And by the way, this is based on the work of Peter Block, which if your audience hasn't read, you should absolutely read just about everything that Peter Block has ever written, including all 4 editions of his book called Flawless Consulting.
Okay.
But so he has this thing called a surrogate manager. And this is a person who in a position who acts on behalf of or in place of a manager. In other words, a surrogate manager has been invested the authority to make decisions on behalf of someone.
Okay.
And I think it's an important point, a delineation point, to say that a consultant can come up with what I'll call the Ford model. They can come up with findings. Here's what I found. They can come up with, here's some options to take care of what I found as to the problem. They can even make recommendations. I think you should do this, and here's why. Or maybe here's a couple different, based on the options of the 3 that I'm talking about. This is the one I would pick and why. But a consultant does not make the decision. Now, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with being a surrogate manager. I mean, I think that surrogate managers can be great, but I do think that it has to be clear at the beginning of the relationship which one are they looking for, because you cannot be both. Those 2 things are mutually exclusive. And I think where people get stuck is when they enter a role thinking they're one, and the customer is really looking for the other. So I want to make that abundantly clear up front. Are you investing in it, or are you giving me the authority to make decisions on your behalf? Or will you make all decisions and I will just bring you options and even make some recommendations, but you will make all decisions? And I think that's an important point of clarity for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think a lot, especially for those that are bookkeepers or controllers or even fractional CFOs, because there's this gray line that you are performing the task. As a bookkeeper, you're performing certain tasks. You are sort of acting on behalf of the client, performing certain tasks, getting a job done. Same with a CPA, doing the taxes. But when you're wearing your consultant hat, it's completely different. It really is. I agree with you. The Ford model, you're finding out what's going on, recommending options, but you're not making the decision. You're not actually
Right.
doing something. You're guiding the
Hmm.
client.
And if you want to have a model where you do make decisions on behalf, I think that's great. Just make sure that you price appropriately for it, because I think that's the other thing. When you are in the mode of surrogate manager, where you are making decisions on behalf of someone, that's a higher risk position for you to be in. And as a result, you should get paid commiserately for that additional risk that you're taking on. And I think it makes complete and total sense. And I think where a lot of people get caught is they start making decisions, but they don't change the nature of the relationship from a price perspective.
Interesting. Okay. Let's actually dive into that a little bit more, making decisions, because a lot of people that we talk to, accountants, bookkeepers, CPAs, they don't want to make decisions because they have this sort of this idea that they have this imposter syndrome, or their advice is not on par where it should be. And so they don't want to make decisions. But what we tell them is you're not supposed to make decisions. You're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to point out the problem areas and recommend solutions, kind of exactly what you were referring to with the Ford model. So how do you talk or consult with consultants who are dealing with this sort of imposter syndrome, or this idea that they just are not equipped to guide?
Well, it's interesting. I think this probably affects accountants more than any of the other professions. And that is this notion of I shouldn't be making decisions, because for a long, long time that was highly frowned upon by the accounting profession.
Yeah.
I think that's changed a little bit, but I do think that I think part of it is just simply clarity of relationship, right? If you go into the relationship and say, I'm not going to make decisions for you, I think then you're okay. I think when the expectation from the customer is that you are going to make decisions and you don't, that's where the conflict occurs.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. If you start making decisions and the customer's like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, that was supposed to be me.
Right.
And that's why I think, vagueness is the enemy of strategy here, right? So, and really deciding whether or not you want to be just a consultant or a surrogate manager is a strategic decision
Mm-hmm.
on the firm's part, or on your part if you're just an individual. That is a strategic decision. It is a strategy, not a strategic plan. I think that's another thing that becoming more and more clear in the last 6 months, is that there's a grand confusion among what is strategy versus what is a strategic plan. And these things get conflated all the time, and they're very different things. A strategy is just something like that. Am I going to be consultant? Am I going to be a surrogate manager? I'm going to be different ones to different people. What's my strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And then the plan is how you effectuate that and put that in place in your organization.
Yeah. Hey there, Adam here from the Escaping the Accountant's Trap podcast. I'd like to personally invite you to a free masterclass that we're conducting this Thursday called How to Start a CFO Service. To register, just go to thecfoproject.com and click free training at the top. See you then. We look at it as strategy versus tactics.
Sure.
There's two different things. A tactic is not a strategy. For example, a strategy is like a marketing strategy. How am I going to get clients? A tactic is doing Facebook ads,
Mm-hmm.
or going
Right.
to BNI or something to that effect.
Yep.
Completely
So
agree.
cool.
So in terms of, just to talk a little bit more about the guiding, not doing, we're big advocates. I completely agree with what you're saying. We're big advocates for asking the right questions,
Mm-hmm.
which will help the client figure out how to understand what they need to focus on.
Sure.
There's an art to asking the right questions versus having the right answers. You don't need to have the right answers. You just have the right questions.
Yes, I would wholly agree with that. And one of the big meta consulting ideas around question asking also comes from Peter Block, and his book called "The Answer to How Is Yes," which is a great title.
Okay.
The answer to how is yes. And in this book, he posits something pretty interesting, and that is that in most consulting opportunities, we are dealing with 6 and only 6 questions. How do you do it? How long will it take? How much does it cost? How do you get those people to change? How do you measure it? And how have other people done it successfully? That's it,
Okay, say
right?
those again.
All right. How do you do it? How long will it
Okay.
take? How much does it cost? How do you get those people to change? How do you measure it? How have other people done it successfully?
Okay.
Now, these are the questions that are often asked by the prospect or customer, even if it's a situation.
Okay.
The issue that he points out that as a consultant is that these questions they're fine questions. There's nothing morally inferior about these questions. He says, but they are often, and I love this point, asked and answered too early in the process. So it's not the fact that they are just asked, because the person who is asking is going to be, because they're very practical. All of these questions are extraordinarily practical, and people who ask them are perceived as smart. But oftentimes they are asked and answered too early. So what he does is he proposes a series of what he calls "what matters" questions that are the counter remedy to these questions. So let's take the last one and say, how have others done this successfully? This is AKA the reference question, right? Okay. Have you worked with others who have done this successfully? So how have others done this successfully? That's a fine question. It's an important question. But the question that you really need to ask and answer first, or more fully before you ask that, is, what is it that we want to create together? Because picture if the Wright brothers had asked the questions of how have others done this successfully on their way from Dayton, Ohio to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. So Wilbur, how have other people done this powered man flight thing successfully? Well, Wilbur, I did some research in the Dayton library, and it wasn't really good, because I came up with this Icarus Daedalus guy and wax and the wings crash into the river. That didn't work out so well. Leonardo da Vinci, perhaps the greatest mind ever, designed no less than 4 flying machines, but none of them get off the ground. Actually, one of them kind of hops up and down until it destroys itself on the launch pad. Oh, you're right, World. Well, the hell with it. Let's go back to the bicycle shop, right? So if you ask how have others done it successfully, you are stifling any possibility of innovation.
Yeah, because you're going to put yourself in a box.
Right. So if that's where you start, and a lot of people do, with how have others done this, whatever this is, successfully, there's no possibility of innovation, which is frightening to me. But if you instead ask, what do we want to create together? What is the desired outcome? What is the envisioned future that we have? And we define that. Then we will probably ask the question that the Wright brothers asked themselves once they decided that what they wanted was flying machine, is, what can we learn from others who have attempted this? And of course, the others who have attempted this, and oh, by the way, did it successfully, were birds. And what they observed then was that the bird wings were flexible. And would move with the currents, and that's where they had the idea for the wings that would simulate the bird wings, not fixed wing, but would move with the ailerons and all of that stuff. And that's where they got this insight. But if they had focused on how have other men done this successfully, they could not possibly innovate. So Block points out in these series of questions, I can recite them all, what the other 6 are, but I prefer that people read the book because it. There's some really important things, including well, I'll do one more quickly, but the idea of how do you measure it? Because that one, there's a cult of measurement in business today. I call them pantometrists. They want to measure like absolutely everything. And because they believe what you can measure, you can manage, that which
Peter
is
Drucker.
Attributed to Peter Drucker. He never said it. So if you he never, ever said no. Peter Drucker did not say that.
Okay.
He didn't say the opposite either. What you can't measure, you can't manage. What he said was something like this, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's more close. What you measure, you will get.
Okay.
That's different from what you can measure, you can manage. Right? What you measure, in other words, if you measure, for example, in a professional firm, hours, you're going to get hours. Okay. You're going to get them. Are you going to get successful customers? Not necessarily, because that's not what you're measuring. Right? So what you measure, you will get. So the replacement for a question for how do you measure it is what is the judgment that we need to make? Because if you really think about it, every measurement is really a judgment in disguise, because what we're doing is we're deciding that the thing we're measuring is the thing that's important. And I think oftentimes it's not. It shouldn't be. And in some cases, it can cause actual harm. Famous case, the National Health Service in the UK put a measurement around that people were being brought into emergency rooms and weren't being seen fast enough. So they created this rule that said, okay, every hospital in the system has to see a patient within, or a patient that comes into the emergency room must be seen by a medical professional within 30 minutes of crossing the threshold. Right. And guess what they got? They got it down. However, they also got was ambulances being lined up outside the emergency room, because since the people knew that the measurement was once they cross the threshold, we've got to see them within 30 minutes. They left them in the line. And now you have ambulances lined up outside where people are not getting care. And oh, by the way, now there's not ambulances available to go get other people.
Yeah.
Right. So what you measure, you will get. But is it the right thing to be measuring? Are you making the right judgment about what to measure?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of vanity. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of vanity numbers in business, and a lot of people measure, even just as something as simple as the P&L. 80% of the P&L is taken up by low-level expenses,
right?
That don't matter in the grand scheme of things usually. And
one of my biggest mantras about the P&L, just because this brings in my pricing ideas too, is that we should take discounts should not be taken off of revenue and then shown revenue less discount. Discounts should be moved all the way to the bottom line, because a discount is not an expense. It is a reduction of profit. So the line should be profit before discounts, discounts, profit after discounts.
Interesting. Okay.
Because if you really think about it, a discount it doesn't change cost structure at all.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really off the bottom line, not the top line. And when you frame it that way, people are like, oh my God, we are giving away far too many discounts.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a topic I would like to get into. We just don't have a lot of time for that. This is very interesting. So Peter Block, and we're almost out of time, but Peter Block, what's the book that you recommend?
The two of them, but the answer to how is yes. That's for the questions, but also his book and any of the editions. So the 4th edition is just out, called Flawless Consulting. So that would be the other one that I would recommend.
Okay, the Flawless Consulting. Before we run out of time, pricing. What is your views on how consultants, in our case, business advisors, CFOs, should price?
Subscription-based. Become huge proponent of subscription. I also, in addition to the Sage Thought Leadership podcast, I also do one with a guy by the name of Ron Baker, who is the grandfather of the value pricing movement. But we have done a show for 10 years called The Soul of Enterprise. And for the last 4 or probably 5 years now, we've been exploring this topic of subscription-based pricing often on the shows that we do. If you go to thesoulofenterprise.com, there's at the top, there's like a show topics. You can click and see all of the shows that we've done on subscription. But I firmly believe that subscription puts the relationship at the center of being the most important thing. So how do we effectuate this relationship? And I think that's why it's more important.
Yeah.
Right. So subscription pricing is the thing that does that best when properly implemented.
Yeah, I agree. Because the hourly billing, well, first of all, you're not charging for your value; you're charging for your time. And second off, a lot of clients, customers, business owners, they don't have any insight as to why you're spending all this time doing something, because they have no idea what you're doing.
I would even take it a step further: get rid of your timesheet completely.
Yeah.
Jettison the timesheet. There's no reason for you to be tracking time at all. Zero. I do this experiment. You like this, Adam? So I have a room full of, say, a couple hundred accounting professionals, and I'll say, raise your hand if you've ever filled out a timesheet, and every hand goes up, right?
Yeah.
And then I say, keep your hands up if you've ever not put on the timesheet what exactly happened, either too few hours or too many hours, and every hand stays up. And I say, so, and then then some of you are going to argue that you need your timesheets so you can measure actual costs.
Yeah, it's a disconnect.
But it's not actual anything. It's optimal because you put on the timesheet not what actually happened, but either what you think should have happened, or what the customer thinks should have happened, or what your boss thinks should have happened.
Yeah, and that happens a lot outside of timesheets too.
So time to get rid of them. They got to go.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can somebody learn more about you and your other podcasts and Sage in general?
Yep. Sage.com is the website to go to. We've got lots of products in the accounting space. Probably our biggest one that most people are interested in nowadays is Sage Intact, which is a fantastic subscription based, multi-tenant, in the cloud, everything, all the bells and whistles you could possibly want from an accounting solution perspective. But as far as me personally, if you go to edkless.com, you'll find the links to all my other properties, including the Soul of Enterprise and Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, et cetera.
Very cool. Well, we'll put those links in our show notes. Ed, thank you so much for being on the show today.
My honor and pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening or watching, thank you so much for spending the last few minutes with us as we discussed how to escape the accountant's trap. Bye for now.